So I am truly honored to stand before you this afternoon to give with you or to share with you some thoughts regarding your Vision 2020 theme, Act, React, and Impact. So when I was a child, I had no idea that the world was so cruel. The truth of it, though, was that this country was only barely a decade away from the passage of the Civil Rights Act, which is kind of interesting because when I thought of that time frame, and I'm not sure if it's because of the videos that I used to watch, they were like in black and white, and you would hear that static in the background. But I always thought that that was way before my time. It wasn't until I actually sat down one day and did the math that I realized that that was almost like yesterday. Then I was like, huh? Like, what? I can't even conceptualize that sometime, especially because of the things that we see currently happening in this country. So when asked the question of when were women allowed to vote, people would quickly cite the 19th Amendment and say we were allowed to vote in 1920. But really, most African American women, especially in the South, we could not vote until 1965 with the passage of the Voting Rights Act. It's not funny that 54 years later, we are still fighting for voting rights. Why? Because that which is guarded has great value. You've heard it before. Guard your heart. Guard your tongue. Why? These things are lifelines. Apparently, some have been instructed to guide the ballot box. And interestingly, it seems to be by any means necessary. But if there was ever a positive from this, it's that women, and in particularly Black women, have gotten the memo too. Because contrary to the messages about African Americans in general, data, at least in the Democratic Party, consistently shows Black women are key voting blocs. And we're key voting blocs in this upcoming 2020 election because collectively we vote, and we vote in record numbers. However, we don't have the luxury of simply showing up at the polling site on election day, voting and then going home. Nope. Our work really needs to start before election day and continue thereafter. You know, like I do, the political system was not created for me, nor was it truly created for you to have a place of power within it. Hence, in order to get a spot or to get a place, grassroots efforts are most times necessary. And education about the process is vital. During Reconstruction, when what was thought to be too many African Americans holding elected offices or elected positions, the legislature changed laws. And with those changes, we lost political power. As a result, our communities were adversely affected, as were we. When people think of politics, many think of candidates. But there are so many roles where African Americans, and especially Black women, can participate. And believe me when I say that her voice, our voice, and our visualizations are necessary. We are needed. We have unique experiences in this country, a country still dealing with racial and gender disparities. When people think of racism, generally the first two colors that come to mind are Black and white. When people think of gender, what people think about is male and female. But both groups, Blacks and females, have had to fight for equality. We, however, Black women, we have had to fight for both. It begs the question, who's fighting with and for us? This is why recognitions like this, like the ones that are happening today, right here, are so important. It is why I write a weekly column showcasing Black women and our experiences. It is why it is important to clap for one another. Why? Because if we don't, who will? We are oftentimes and consistently on the front lines acting in the best interest of our families, of our communities, of our nation, but not because not only do we see a need, but because many of us have lived in need. Our mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers have sacrificed in ways that she can only tell God about. During those times that seem to be too painful to even think about. This is our lineage. There was a time when it was common to hear a slogan, "A mind is a terrible thing to waste." Now, children who look like me and children who look like you are failing at tremendous rates. And it's not because they can't learn, because we know they can. Schools are underfunded intentionally. Policies are kept in place intentionally, and we bear the burden of it. We have attainable housing issues, healthcare crises, and continuous battles for equal pay. It is easy for some to give up hope, but we must rise, like our mothers did, and like her mothers did, and like our mother's mother did. We must rise because, as the African proverb says, if you educate a girl, you educate a nation, a whole nation. We carry generational influence. We must rise to use our gifts and talents to improve the environments of which we live, despite the obstacles. That's right, despite the obstacles that we face, we must rise. Why? Because we are our mother's daughters. This is the real tea, though. Problems are easy to find. They are everywhere. History has shown us, however, that solutions, especially when we're talking about solutions of social justice issues, can effectively be found in grassroots efforts. Coming together on a grassroots level is important, especially when counteracting mainstream systems that are still dealing with racial and gender disparities. 54 years later, we are still talking about voting rights and the effects thereof. No one is going to give us a change if we don't seek the change. We have to shift. We have to move. In going forth in movement, it is important to be clear about what matters to you and to the community of which you live. It is not what someone else has convinced you about what matters to you, but you must truly understand what matters to you for you. If you do not, you may find yourself still walking in the back of someone else's line, making their issues a priority when they have not made you one. Okay. There are many things that are happening today that mimic those things that should have ended in the 1960s. 2 days ago, I had a conversation with an elderly man who told me that he was angry. He said that he graduated from high school in the 1950s and that he had participated in some of the civil rights protests. He said that he was angry because he had sacrificed and that he was not satisfied with where and what he was seeing the people in this society are held. He wanted to see more progress. Now, I am not speechless often, but as I listened to him and looked in his eyes, I could see his pain. I could feel it because he reminded me of my grandparents. All but one have died. I've been thinking about that man. I'd imagine that there are many elderly people who feel the way that he does. This is not what I know. This is what I know. We are in crises. Time out for fast talkers and photo ops. We have been leaders in grassroots movements since day one. Our stories are not often told, but we have been right there, strategizing, instructing, teaching, and leading from both the front and the back. We have been involved, and we must stay involved. In order to impact political decisions, both locally and on the state level, being involved is crucial. It helps with developing and strengthening relationships. It also helps with increasing awareness about the processes as well as the obstacles, because there are many. I know that saying get involved may be easier said than done, because there are very real obstacles with getting involved and staying involved. But that could be a whole workshop in itself. This is the thing, though, that you don't hear. The political establishment needs us. Amen. Not to do things the way that it does things, because, as you remember, the political establishment was never created for people like me and people like you to hold positions of power. Yet it is our voting block that gives it life. We must guard it. So I say attend a political meeting or two. Join or start a political club. Host a candidate or social issue house party. Write an article and have it published. Send an email to a political person and establish relationships within the industry. Think outside the box. We have been visionaries, acting, reacting, and impacting. So outside the box is not new to us. After all, we are all women in action. Thank you.